This episode is dedicated to my old friends Benny and Marty. They may not have known much about Star Trek, but they understood love and knew how to have fun, which is what this series is all about. On the Sega Genesis, you can take Sonic 3 and stack it on top of Sonic and Knuckles, which forms a new game entirely called Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You can basically do the same thing with Star Trek and the premise. You'll quickly find that you can slap this bad boy onto any original episode or film, and it creates an even bigger story that deepens the plot and reiterates its core themes. It's actually pretty impressive. But before I introduce today's episode, I want to talk about Jimbo here. I feel like I haven't had the chance to talk about him yet. Captain Kirk is a more complex character than people give him credit for. I think his promiscuity leads to generalizations regarding his behavior and sometimes segues into stigmatizing stereotypes about bisexuality. I think what's more interesting than his body count are his feelings surrounding these events. The situations he actually consents to are short-lived and escapist in nature. A shocking amount of the women he encounters are antagonists, who he has to charm or sleep with in order to save the ship and further the agenda of Starfleet and the Federation. Since it's the 60s, a lot of these encounters are framed as big wins, but through a modern lens you realize that Kirk is not consenting to everything that's happening to him. There are many instances in which Kirk seems desensitized to the concept of using his body to get what he needs. Spock's pressure to conform is coming directly from the heterocentric customs of his home planet. He joined Starfleet against his father's wishes, so in a lot of ways, Starfleet is like a safe haven where he can be shaded from the harsh judgment of his father's culture. People don't really know what to expect from Vulcans at this point, so Spock has leeway to relax and be a little strange. Kirk, always the foil to Spock, feels pressure from Starfleet to live up to a lofty reputation. Spock is the first Vulcan in Starfleet, but Jim is the first person of Earth to lead a mission of science and diplomacy in deep space. In many instances, he is burdened with representing the entire human race. So he is Starfleet's golden boy. In a system that won't even allow a woman to captain a starship, it's safe to assume that Starfleet's model captain is expected to perform a very masculine, heterosexual role, at least on paper. So it's both safer and easier for Kirk to immerse himself in female candidates than it is to hold out hope that Spock will thaw out enough to be candid about his feelings. After all, planet Vulcan is Earth's closest ally, and Spock is the mixed-race son of a prominent Vulcan ambassador. There are many layers of forbidden here. Ultimately, Kirk values Spock's friendship more than anything else, and it's not something he wants to risk losing. He certainly pushes that envelope at times, but only as far as Spock is willing to play along. There's one more thing I want to talk about before we start, and that's the romanticism of duty. Kirk and Spock's shared duty to the Enterprise is romanticized to the point of being really fucking gay. Spock's proclamations of loyalty often hint upon the deeper layers of their relationship. Just what these layers consist of has been debated for decades. But there's an ongoing motif that implies that there's a sense of duty, friendship, brotherhood, and something else. You'll find a million examples of this, but here's a good one to start with. In this scene, Kirk is being psychically attacked by an alien mind, and Spock draws upon their rapport to ground him. You see different levels of intimacy represented in how Spock refers to Kirk throughout the scene.
I'm losing command. Captain, I've lost command. I've lost the Enterprise. Jim.
Then after all that, he's like, whew! Anyway. Their hard-to-define closeness brings to mind the many different flavors of love described by the ancient Greeks. Gene Roddenberry later takes this idea and runs extremely homosexual marathons with it. For now, I'll just include this statement of his. Yes, there's certainly some of that, certainly with love overtones. Deep love. The only difference being the Greek ideal. We never suggested in the series physical love between the two, but we certainly had the feeling that the affection was sufficient for that, if that were the particular style of the 23rd century. In the 1970s, that's about as close to yes as you could get from a showrunner. So duty acts as a barrier of safety for them during the 5-year mission. Their love can be expressed in these terms without risking social backlash or fracturing the world that they've built together. Mr. Spock will go out of his way to take a bullet for Kirk in the name of logic, and Kirk chastises him because doesn't he realize how much he means to Starfleet? At this time, neither of them are willing to risk their friendship in the name of romantic love or lust because who knows what would happen in that scenario? Alright, that's enough background for today. I think you'll get the vision with me. So let's talk about an episode. Lucky for us, this is an award-winning episode and a longtime fan favorite. City on the Edge of Forever is the penultimate episode of Season 1. It was first released April 6, 1967, and it was written by the notoriously eccentric speculative fiction writer Harlan Ellison. It also features guest star Joan Collins, who is a legend in her own right. So this is a great episode as is. Slap the gay shit on there and you get a bisexual love triangle. Let's go. The Enterprise detects strange ripples in time which leads them to a mysterious planet millions of miles away. As they come closer to the planet, the ripples in time also distort space, causing turbulence on the Enterprise. Sulu is injured in the turbulence. Dr. McCoy arrives on the bridge with a drug called Corgazine, which acts as a stimulant. After Sulu is revived, the Enterprise is rocked again, causing Bones to inject himself with 100 times the normal amount. So 5 minutes into the story, Bones is deliriously high on space meth. He doesn't recognize anyone and has this delusion that everyone wants to murder him, so he runs away using his newfound meth powers and manages to beam down to the planet. A rescue party beams down after him. That's when they encounter the Guardian... Okay. That's when they encounter the Guardian... That's when they encounter the Guardian of Forever, a sentient portal to different times and dimensions. Spock starts to record their findings. McCoy jump scares everyone and leaps into the portal. That causes history to be altered, and the landing party is trapped in a place outside of time. So now they have to save Dr. McCoy and set right whatever event caused him to change history. Spock approximates the time that McCoy jumped in, and he and the captain go after him. They end up in 1930s New York, roughly a week before McCoy is supposed to arrive. There's some hijinks as they steal time-appropriate clothes and are chased by the police. They hide in a homeless shelter and quickly change outfits. Spock says that his tricorder had recorded the exact time and location of McCoy's arrival, but the tricorder is useless if it can't be tethered to the ship's computer. Kirk's like, can't you just, build a computer? And Spock's like, yeah, but it would be a huge pain in the ass. And then Kirk gaily provokes him into proving that he can actually build a computer, but he'll need the supplies.
Excuse me. I sometimes expect too much of you.
Up to this point, the rapport in this mission has been unchallenged, and their flute-laden banter plentiful. Just typical Kirk and Spock shit. That's when they encounter the shelter's owner, Edith Keeler. Kirk immediately becomes infatuated with her. Spock remains civil, but cagey. Edith looks over at Spock with guarded curiosity. Since she takes a liking to Kirk, she finds both of them work in the soup kitchen. Spock looks at Kirk questioningly whenever he expresses attraction to Edith, and Kirk continually feels the need to justify his feelings to Spock. As they have dinner together, Miss Keeler lets loose an outlandish speech about how the future will be a utopia filled with spaceships and equality. Kirk is absolutely enraptured. He's like, holy crap, Spock, she's literally describing our timeline. And Spock's like, yeah, Jim, I guess. Speculation, maybe, gifted insight, who knows. Kirk says, I find her most uncommon, Mr. Spock. And if looks could kill, Edith Keeler would be a pile of dust. Edith is impressed with their cleaning job, so she gives them more work and offers to find them an available apartment in her building. As they engage in playful banter, Spock stands some feet away, facing the other direction, looking annoyed and uncomfortable. Spock's interactions with Kirk become strained at this time. They now have an apartment together, so they continue to cosplay as a pair of migrants, and Spock begins working with primitive tools to hopefully build a computer and find leads on the McCoy situation. Kirk comes home with groceries, and they have some very domestic bickering about the supplies that Spock needs and Kirk's ability to obtain them. Edith pokes her head in to say that she found more work for them. She notices all of Spock's equipment and is like, "What is all of this?" Spock gives her a sassy answer, clearly frustrated with the whole situation. While they're cleaning at the homeless shelter, Spock points out a watchmaker's tool set that he could use for his project. He breaks into the chest to lift the tools while Kirk stands guard. Keeler finds out and confronts Spock about it. Interestingly, she walks right by Kirk and only places blame on Spock. Spock explains that he was going to return the tools in the morning. She begins to argue with him, but Kirk cuts her off, defending Spock's actions, and then gives her the sparkly eyes. She's like, "Okay, I guess I'll let it slide, but only on the condition that you walk me home." She walks closer to Kirk as she says this, and the three of them form a perfect triangle. You could suggest that Spock is representing logic and Kirk's waning sense of duty in this scene, but either way, he's been placed directly between Jim and Edith. As they form this triangle, Edith says, "I still have a few questions I'd like to ask about you two." So the idea they're going for here is that Edith has a feeling that they're secretly spacemen from the future, so she starts to needle Kirk about his relationship with Spock because she senses their captain-first officer bond of loyalty and stuff. But the subtext here is pretty obvious too. She's also trying to figure out if Spock is a threat to her budding relationship with Kirk. And you can't exactly blame her for thinking this. They show up together acting very close, and Kirk is hesitant to explain his mysterious roommate to her. There's also the fact that Spock clearly takes issue with her. Edith's actually been really cool to them so far, having sheltered and employed them in Depression-era New York. But Spock doesn't even express his usual impassive gratitude towards her the way he does with other strangers. He just doesn't like her, which is a totally logical and unemotional stance to take. If I were in Edith's shoes, I'd definitely think that Spock is jealous. You've already seen a small piece of this next scene, so you'll find it familiar, but now we have more context.
I still have a few questions I'd like to ask about you two. Oh, and don't give me that. Questions about little old us, look? You know as well as I do how out of place you two are around here.
Interesting. Where would you estimate we belong, Miss Keeler?
You? At his side, as if you've always been there and always will.
Edith is a sharp judge of character, and she's already sized up her competition, a repressed guy who clearly hasn't made a move. Her comment is a thinly veiled declaration aimed to expose and challenge Spock. She doubles down on her flirtation with Kirk. Kirk is either too smitten to notice their rivalry or chooses to ignore it. Spock turns away from their display, looking hurt.
I'm finished with the furnace.
Captain. Even when he doesn't say it, he does.
Edith has won this battle for now. The flames of passion ignite in Kirk's eyes as he watches Edith walk away, and he follows her. In the background, Spock watches Kirk and tends to a flame of his own. The scene cuts to Kirk and Edith walking down the sidewalk hand in hand. A romantic song plays on the radio. The lyrics go like this: "Good night, sweetheart, though I'm not beside you. Still, my love will guide you. Dreams enfold you." It's an interesting song to use, since the singer seems to currently be parted from their dream-addled lover. Edith asks why Spock calls him Captain. Kirk vaguely explains that they served together. She asks if they did something wrong or if he's afraid of something. Something wrong could refer to a number of illegal activities, including homosexual behavior.
Did you do something wrong? Are you afraid of something? Whatever it is, let me help.
Let me help. 100 years or so from now, I believe, a famous novelist will write a classic using that theme. He'll recommend those 3 words even over "I love you."
Incidentally, Spock says those exact words to Kirk in the following episode.
I have my own will, Captain. Let me help.
And Kirk uses very similar verbiage with Spock in the episode after that.
Trying to help you, Spock.
Spock finally gains headway on his computer project and finds 2 articles. One predicts that Edith Keeler will die in a vehicular accident that year. The other says she will become an influential humanitarian in the late 30s. Spock believes that Edith Keeler is the focal point in time to which McCoy will be drawn. He's also convinced that she will die soon, and expresses this to the captain. That's when McCoy jumps into the picture, still completely strung out on space meth. He harasses a homeless man, begins to sob, and collapses in the street. The next day, he wanders into Edith's homeless shelter. Edith sees that he's delirious and makes him lay down. Kirk and Spock are serving breakfast and miss Bones by only a few seconds. Spock finally discovers how McCoy had altered history. After he jumped into the portal, an alternate reality occurred in which he saves Edith Keeler from an automobile accident. She goes on to start a pacifist movement that delays the United States' entry into World War II. This causes Germany to win, and the rest of history is altered as a result. The only way this can be avoided is if McCoy is stopped from saving her life when the time comes. Kirk is really upset by this news, and finally admits to Spock that he's fallen in love with Edith. Spock reiterates that she must die. Edith tends to Bones, who is slowly coming down off the drug. He's still convinced that she's a hallucination, but he's content. Edith takes note of his strange clothes and references to being an officer on a ship. Later, Kirk follows Edith up the stairs to her apartment, and Spock sees him catch her from falling down the stairs. They then start to kiss, and Spock awkwardly disappears back into their apartment. As Kirk approaches, he pops back out, and he's like, "Sorry, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but you really can't be trying to save her life. Don't forget the whole Nazi Germany thing." Meanwhile, Bones is finally all cleaned up and offers to help Edith around the shelter as payment for her kindness. She notices that he's really out of step with the times. She says she's going to see a Clark Gable movie, and he's like, "I have no idea who that is, but have fun." She holds hands with Kirk as they cross the street. She's like, "Let's go see a Clark Gable movie." And he's like, "A what?" And she's like, "Hey, that's exactly what Dr. McCoy said." And he freaks out like, "McCoy, he's here?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's at the shelter." He tells her to stay put and runs back toward the shelter, yelling for Spock. Spock runs over, and McCoy hears him yelling, so he comes out too. They all reunite. Edith walks towards them, wandering into oncoming traffic. Kirk sees what's about to happen and almost goes after her. Spock shouts, "No, Jim!" Kirk knows in his heart that Spock is right. As McCoy starts forward to save her, Kirk stops him and holds on to him as Edith is hit by a car and killed. The song from earlier is reprised in orchestral form. I assume the song was originally intended as a foreshadowing of this event, but you can also look at the first time it's played as being a reference to Spock's point of view and the last time as a reference to Kirk's. Or, more hauntingly, you could view the lyrics from Edith's perspective. McCoy's like, "Don't you realize what you've just done? I could have saved her." And Spock is like, "He knows, Doctor. He knows." So time is all fixed and shit, and Kirk's like, "Let's get the hell out of here." And that's the final line of the episode. No matter how you look at this story, it ends in tragedy, and that's part of what makes this episode so popular. And the saddest part isn't even that Edith dies, although that's clearly terrible. It's that Kirk and Edith's love is doomed from the start. Their feelings are fully requited, but they just can't be. In this triangle, no one wins. Doomed to love all around. Spock desperately wants to be content as Kirk's friend, but he just can't help feeling bothered whenever Kirk reaches out for someone else. Kirk also tries to place his feelings for Spock on the back burner. It's not exactly easy for him either, being in love with someone who's perpetually conflicted in their identity, has a mysterious sexuality, and a choking fear of passion and vulnerability. Now, it's time for the bonus scene. Harlan Ellison's original script deviated from the final product in a few areas. This final scene was likely cut due to time constraints, but it is reflected in graphic novel form. I figured I'd show you because it's really gay. After they return to the ship, Captain Kirk is shown in his quarters, privately mourning the death of Edith. Spock enters Kirk's room on ship's business. Once he sees him agonizing in the dark, he suddenly shifts gears and says, "Jim." Kirk turns, surprised, and says, "Mr. Spock, that's the first time you've ever called me anything but Captain." This obviously isn't true to the on-screen narrative, but it definitely touches on the ideas that I explored earlier in this video. Spock says, "On my world, the nights are very long. The sound of the silver birds against the sky is very sweet. My people know there is always time enough for everything. You could come with me for a rest. You would feel comfortable there." Kirk looks forlornly into the blackness of space, reflecting, "All the time in the world." Spock finishes his sentence, "and filled with tomorrows." You have this very tender moment between them that reflects Jim's pain and Spock's desire to assuage it. First of all, I think this is a very sweet gesture regardless, and would no doubt be a great way to aid in Jim's healing. But there's also a romantic lean to it that's difficult to ignore. This guy who never takes shore leave is inviting Jim to his home planet, emphasizing the long, beautiful nights they could share together. Anytime one of Kirk's hopeless romances blows up in his face, Spock is there to pick up the pieces. He's like, "Don't worry, Jim, I'm here. I can make you forget about her and take the pain all away." There's a scene from the episode Requiem for Methuselah that demonstrates this in a direct and literal sense, and the implications are devastating. I'm strongly considering this one for my next episode. Either that or the drug cult episode. We'll see. As noble as Spock tends to be, perhaps his motives here aren't totally altruistic. It's possible that he feels partly to blame for Jim's anguish. Maybe if he could be more open about his feelings, Jim wouldn't feel the need to hurt himself over and over with these desperate romances. By coming to his aid, Spock can relieve his guilt and also reestablish his place at Jim's side. It's not the soundest logic, but Spock's Vulcan logic tends to go out the window entirely where the captain is concerned. Well, I sincerely hope you enjoyed this spicy addition to the video series. If you've watched City on the Edge of Forever, please let me know what you thought of my observations and tell me your opinions on the episode. Additionally, if you've ever read any of Harlan Ellison's works and have suggestions on short stories that I should read, please let me know. I've only ever read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I thought it was really fucking dope. Until next time.